What if I told you that the difference between someone who maintains emotional balance under pressure and someone who becomes overwhelmed by stress isn't willpower, genetics, or personality, but rather the cumulative effect of hundreds of micro-practices so small they seem almost insignificant? The latest research in neuroplasticity reveals that lasting change doesn't happen through dramatic overhauls or heroic efforts, but through tiny, consistent actions that gradually rewire the fundamental patterns of how our brains process experience. The neuroscientist Donald Hebb famously observed that neurons that fire together, wire together, a principle that has revolutionized our understanding of how consciousness itself can be intentionally cultivated. But what Hebb discovered about synaptic plasticity has implications far beyond academic neuroscience. It reveals that every moment of conscious attention, every repeated action, every consistent emotional response is literally reshaping the physical structure of our brains. This understanding bridges the gap between ancient contemplative traditions and modern science in remarkable ways. The Buddhist concept of karma, often misunderstood as cosmic reward and punishment, actually describes something neuroscience now confirms: that our repeated actions create lasting impressions in consciousness that influence future experience. What the contemplatives understood intuitively, researchers can now observe directly through neuroimaging technology. The philosophical implications are staggering. If our brains are constantly being rewired by our experiences and actions, then the question of who we are becomes not a fixed identity but an ongoing creative process. We are not victims of our conditioning. We are active participants in the construction of our own consciousness. This perspective transforms personal growth from something that happens to us into something we consciously participate in creating. But here's where it becomes specifically relevant to emotional intelligence and resilience. The most powerful changes don't require dramatic interventions or life-altering commitments. Research by Dr. B.J. Fogg at Stanford University demonstrates that lasting transformation occurs most reliably through what he calls tiny habits, behaviors so small that they require minimal motivation and create minimal resistance, yet over time generate profound neurological and behavioral changes. Consider the work of Dr. Richie Davidson at the University of Wisconsin, whose research team discovered that meditation practitioners showed measurable changes in brain structure after just 8 weeks of practice. But the participants who showed the most dramatic changes weren't those who meditated for hours daily. They were those who practiced consistently, even if only for a few minutes each day. The brain responds more powerfully to consistency than to intensity. Understanding how tiny habits create lasting change requires exploring what neuroscientists call experience-dependent neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to reorganize itself based on repeated patterns of activity. Unlike the dramatic neuroplasticity that occurs after brain injury, experience-dependent plasticity happens continuously throughout our lives, responding to the subtle patterns of attention, emotion, and behavior we practice daily. Dr. Alvaro Pascual Leone's research at Harvard Medical School revealed something remarkable about this process. The brain begins to change within hours of learning a new skill or practicing a new behavior. Using transcranial magnetic stimulation, his team could observe measurable changes in motor cortex activity after just a single session of finger exercises. But here's what's crucial for our understanding of emotional transformation. These initial changes only become permanent through consistent repetition over time. This explains why dramatic attempts at change often fail, while seemingly insignificant practices can create profound transformation. When you try to make large behavioral changes, you're essentially asking your brain to reorganize massive neural networks all at once. A process that requires enormous energy and often triggers resistance from older, more established patterns. But tiny habits work with the brain's natural plasticity rather than against it, allowing new neural pathways to strengthen gradually while older patterns slowly weaken through disuse. Consider someone like Michael, a financial advisor who struggled with emotional reactivity during client meetings. For years, he'd tried various approaches to manage his anxiety: positive self-talk, breathing exercises, even medication, but nothing created lasting change. The breakthrough came when he began practicing what seemed like the smallest possible intervention. Every time he sat down at his desk, before doing anything else, he would simply notice the sensation of his feet on the floor for 3 breaths. This practice seems almost absurdly simple, but neuroscientist Dr. Sarah Lazar's research explains why it was so effective. Regular attention to bodily sensations strengthens the insula, a brain region crucial for interoceptive awareness and emotional regulation. Over several months, Michael's tiny habit literally thickened his insular cortex, enhancing his ability to detect emotional arousal before it became overwhelming and respond with greater choice rather than automatic reactivity. The transformation wasn't immediate or dramatic, but it was profound. Michael began noticing subtle signs of stress earlier in conversations, allowing him to adjust his breathing and posture before anxiety escalated. His clients started commenting on his increased presence and confidence. Most importantly, Michael discovered that emotional regulation wasn't something he had to force or manufacture. It became a natural expression of a nervous system that had been gradually retrained through consistent, microscopic practices. This brings us to a profound philosophical question. If our brains are constantly being reshaped by our repeated actions and attention patterns, what does this mean for our sense of fixed identity? The existentialist philosophers explored this territory through concepts like becoming versus being, but neuroscience now provides concrete evidence for what they intuited intellectually. We are not fixed entities who occasionally change. We are dynamic processes of becoming that maintain continuity through pattern and narrative. Every tiny habit you practice is a vote for the kind of person you're becoming, literally sculpting the neural architecture that will generate tomorrow's thoughts, emotions, and responses. This perspective radically reframes personal growth from trying to fix something broken to consciously participating in your own evolution. When we examine how tiny habits specifically impact emotional intelligence and resilience, we discover that the brain's emotional processing centers, the amygdala, prefrontal cortex, and anterior cingulate, are particularly responsive to consistent micro-practices. This isn't surprising when we consider that these regions evolved to detect and respond to patterns in our environment, making them naturally attuned to repetition and consistency. Dr. Judson Brewer's research at Yale demonstrated that even brief mindfulness practices create measurable changes in the default mode network, the brain regions active during rest and self-referential thinking. Participants who practiced just 10 minutes of mindfulness daily for 8 weeks showed decreased activity in areas associated with anxiety and rumination, while simultaneously strengthening regions associated with present moment awareness and emotional balance. But perhaps more importantly for those of us interested in practical transformation, Brewer's research revealed that the benefits didn't require formal meditation or extended sitting practice. The most significant changes occurred in participants who learned to bring mindful attention to routine daily activities, eating, walking, even washing dishes. These micro moments of conscious awareness, accumulated over time, literally rewired the brain's default patterns of attention and emotional reactivity. This principle extends far beyond formal contemplative practice. Consider someone like Rachel, a marketing director who transformed her relationship to workplace stress not through major lifestyle changes, but through what she called transition rituals, tiny practices performed during natural breaks in her day. Before opening emails, she would take one conscious breath. After difficult phone calls, she would briefly stretch her arms overhead. When walking between meetings, she would notice 3 things in her visual field. Each of these actions lasted less than 10 seconds, required no special training or equipment, and could be performed without anyone noticing. Yet over the course of several months, Rachel experienced a fundamental shift in her stress response patterns. Instead of accumulating tension throughout the day, she found herself naturally releasing stress in real time. Instead of carrying difficult interactions into subsequent meetings, she learned to complete emotional cycles and begin each new engagement with greater presence and clarity. The neuroscience behind Rachel's transformation involves what researchers call state-dependent learning, the principle that neural patterns strengthened in one context become more easily accessible in similar contexts. By consistently pairing moments of conscious awareness with routine workplace activities, Rachel was training her brain to access calm, present moment awareness even during stressful situations. This leads us to one of the most empowering discoveries in modern neuroscience: the understanding that every moment of conscious attention is an opportunity to strengthen the neural pathways that support emotional resilience and intelligence. We don't need to wait for perfect conditions, extended periods of free time, or dramatic life changes to begin rewiring our brains toward greater well-being. The compound effect of tiny habits works through what mathematicians call exponential rather than linear growth. A small change practiced consistently doesn't just add up, it multiplies, creating cascading effects throughout multiple life domains. When you strengthen your capacity for present moment awareness through tiny daily practices, you're not just becoming better at mindfulness. You're enhancing your ability to listen deeply to others, respond creatively to challenges, and maintain emotional balance under pressure. This explains why people who commit to seemingly minor practices often report changes that extend far beyond the specific domain they were targeting. Someone who begins a simple gratitude practice might find their relationships improving. Someone who starts taking conscious breaths before meetings might discover increased creativity and problem-solving capacity. The brain's interconnectedness means that strengthening any aspect of emotional intelligence tends to enhance the entire system. Understanding the theory of neuroplasticity is fascinating, but transformation happens through consistent practice. The following protocols are designed to work with your brain's natural plasticity while requiring minimal time and effort, making them sustainable even during busy or stressful periods. 1. The Anchor Breath Protocol. This involves linking conscious breathing to activities you already perform automatically throughout the day. Research by Dr. Alyssa Eppel at UCSF demonstrates that conscious breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system while simultaneously strengthening prefrontal areas responsible for emotional regulation and decision-making. Choose 3 daily activities that you perform consistently, perhaps opening your laptop, walking through doorways, or sitting down in your car. Each time you perform one of these actions, take 1 conscious breath before proceeding. Notice the sensation of air entering and leaving your body, the expansion and contraction of your ribcage, the natural pause between inhale and exhale. This practice requires no additional time since you're simply adding awareness to actions you already perform. Yet over weeks and months, it creates thousands of micro moments of nervous system regulation, gradually retraining your brain's default stress response patterns. The key is consistency rather than perfection. Even remembering half the time creates measurable neurological benefits. 2. The emotional labeling practice. Neuroscientist Dr. Matthew Lieberman's research at UCLA revealed that simply naming emotional experiences reduces activity in the amygdala while strengthening prefrontal regions associated with emotional intelligence. This process, called affect labeling, literally rewires the brain's emotional processing patterns through increased integration between cognitive and emotional centers. Throughout the day, when you notice any emotional response, positive or negative, practice giving it a simple, accurate label. Instead of getting caught in the story about why you're feeling a particular way, simply note anxiety, excitement, frustration, contentment, or whatever fits your present experience. This practice develops what psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between different emotional states with precision. Research shows that people with higher emotional granularity experience greater emotional resilience and are more effective at regulating their responses to stressful situations. 3. The gratitude micro-moment method. Dr. Robert Emmons's research at UC Davis demonstrates that regular gratitude practice creates lasting changes in brain regions associated with emotional processing and social cognition. But rather than requiring formal gratitude journaling, this protocol involves noticing and acknowledging positive aspects of your immediate experience throughout the day. During natural transition moments, waiting for elevators, standing in lines, walking to appointments, briefly notice something you appreciate about your present circumstances. This might be as simple as appreciating indoor heating on a cold day, the convenience of technology, or the fact that your body is carrying you through your daily activities without conscious effort. These micro moments of appreciation literally strengthen neural pathways associated with positive emotion and social connection while weakening patterns of chronic stress and dissatisfaction. The practice becomes particularly powerful during challenging situations, where finding something to appreciate helps maintain emotional balance and perspective. 4. The compassion cultivation technique. Research by Dr. Tanya Singer at the Max Planck Institute reveals that compassion practices create measurable changes in brain regions associated with empathy, emotional regulation, and social cognition. This protocol involves directing brief moments of goodwill toward yourself and others throughout the day. When you notice yourself experiencing self-criticism or judgment, practice offering yourself the same kindness you would extend to a good friend facing similar circumstances. When you encounter difficult people or situations, experiment with silently wishing them well, recognizing that their behavior likely stems from their own suffering or limitations. This isn't about becoming passive or tolerating inappropriate behavior. It's about maintaining your own emotional equilibrium while engaging skillfully with challenging circumstances. Compassion practice literally rewires the brain's social cognition networks, enhancing your capacity for empathy while protecting you from emotional overwhelm in difficult situations. 5. The integration awareness practice. The final protocol involves developing metacognitive awareness, the capacity to observe your own thinking and emotional processes while they're occurring. This practice strengthens what neuroscientists call the central executive network, enhancing your ability to choose your responses rather than reacting automatically to circumstances. Several times throughout the day, pause briefly and ask yourself, what am I experiencing right now? Notice your thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and the quality of your attention without trying to change anything. This simple act of conscious observation begins to create space between your experiences and your automatic reactions to them. Over time, this practice develops what philosophers call witness consciousness, the capacity to remain centered and responsive even during intense emotional experiences. Instead of being overwhelmed by stress, anxiety, or conflict, you learn to recognize these experiences as temporary patterns arising in awareness that don't define or control your essential nature. What becomes apparent through consistent practice of these protocols is that personal transformation doesn't happen through dramatic breakthrough moments, but through the gradual accumulation of tiny shifts in attention, response, and awareness. You don't suddenly become a different person. You gradually discover capacities and qualities that were always present but previously underdeveloped. This process reveals something profound about the nature of human potential. We don't need to acquire emotional intelligence and resilience from somewhere outside ourselves. These qualities are inherent aspects of consciousness that become accessible through the consistent cultivation of present-moment awareness and compassionate response. The tiny habits we've explored simply create the conditions for these natural capacities to emerge and stabilize. The transformation feels both gradual and sudden. Gradual because it happens through countless micro-moments of conscious choice. Sudden because there often comes a point where you recognize that your entire relationship to stress, challenge, and uncertainty has fundamentally shifted. You realize that you're no longer trying to manage difficult emotions. You're able to remain present and responsive even when they arise. The convergence of ancient wisdom traditions and modern neuroscience provides unprecedented validation for approaches to personal transformation that emphasize process over outcome, consistency over intensity, and awareness over effort. What contemplatives understood through direct experience, researchers can now observe through neuroimaging technology and measure through psychological assessment. This scientific validation doesn't diminish the mystery of consciousness. It deepens our appreciation for how remarkably plastic and responsive our brains remain throughout our entire lives. Every moment offers an opportunity to strengthen neural pathways that support greater emotional intelligence, resilience, and well-being. We are never too old, too set in our ways, or too damaged to begin rewiring our brains toward greater flourishing. The implications extend far beyond individual well-being. As more people develop emotional intelligence through consistent micro-practices, we create the possibility for more conscious, compassionate, and resilient communities. The tiny habits you cultivate in your own consciousness ripple outward through your relationships, your work, and your contributions to the world. The journey of rewiring your brain through tiny habits isn't about perfection or dramatic transformation. It's about participating consciously in the ongoing process of becoming who you're capable of being. Every moment of awareness, every conscious breath, every act of self-compassion is literally sculpting the neural architecture that will generate tomorrow's experiences. What makes this approach particularly empowering is its accessibility. You don't need special training, expensive equipment, or ideal circumstances to begin rewiring your brain toward greater emotional intelligence and resilience. You simply need to recognize that every ordinary moment contains extraordinary potential for transformation when approached with conscious awareness and compassionate intention. The habits we've explored today are not ends in themselves but doorways into deeper discoveries about the nature of consciousness and human potential. As your practice develops, you may find yourself naturally drawn toward longer periods of contemplation, more formal study of emotional intelligence, or deeper exploration of consciousness itself. But these developments will arise organically from a foundation of consistent daily practice rather than from forced effort or ambitious goals. Remember that the goal isn't to become someone different, but to become more fully yourself, to access and embody the emotional wisdom, resilience, and compassion that represent your deepest nature. The tiny habits we've discussed simply clear away the accumulated patterns of reactivity and unconsciousness that obscure these natural capacities. As you begin to experiment with these protocols, notice how your experience evolves, not just your emotional responses, but your sense of possibility, your relationships with others, and your capacity to remain present and responsive regardless of circumstances. The changes may be subtle at first, but they compound over time in ways that can transform not just your personal experience, but your entire approach to living. If this exploration of how tiny habits can rewire your brain has inspired new possibilities for your own emotional development, subscribe for more insights into the fascinating intersection of neuroscience, contemplative practice, and practical wisdom. Your brain's capacity for positive change is far greater than you might imagine, and that transformation is always just one conscious breath, one moment of awareness, one tiny habit away from beginning.